Welcome to the Missing Ingredient Podcast with CJ Bruce, where food and beverage founders, operators, and experts share the real strategies behind building successful brands. Let's jump into today's show.
Hey, I'm CJ Bruce, and welcome to the show. This is the podcast for founders and leaders of high-impact food and beverage brands who are serious about scaling. Each episode, I sit down with the people who power the food and beverage industry, brand operators, agencies, vendors, creators, and retailers, to uncomplicate the strategies that take brands from early traction to serious scale. This episode is sponsored by The Missing Ingredient, a food and beverage marketing agency with over a decade in the industry. We take a different approach, starting with your business goals, looking at the full picture, and building a marketing strategy that actually ties back to growth. From content and performance marketing to influencer partnerships and AI-powered workflows, we're an extension of your team, not just another vendor. Learn more at themissingingredient.com. Now for today's guest. Fred Hart is a brand consultant, creative director, and design strategist obsessed with building and stunning CPG brands. Over the last decade, he's built a 30-person branding agency, transformed over 137 CPG brands, won an industry record 6 design effectiveness awards in the last 5 years, and been entrusted by visionary founders and Fortune 500 companies to craft strategic design that moves business forward. Welcome to the show, Fred Hart.
CJ, good to be talking with you again. And Mom, if you're listening, I love you.
Love it. All right, let's start from the beginning. So you've been, over a decade obsessing over CPG brands, and want to just go back. How did you first get into branding and design, and what got you excited about the CPG space?
Yeah, I fell in love with branding and design before I knew what it was. As a kid growing up, obsessed with basketball, actually. I was a big fan of the NBA, and all of my favorite players had really cool shoes. And so shoe design was actually how I kind of fell into graphic design and thus branding and the CPG world. I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago to start my sort of collegiate career. I thought I wanted to be an architect at first, realized it wasn't the right field for me, but then spent 4 years at the University of Arizona in Tucson and studied visual communications, aka fancy talk for graphic design. And it was an internship my junior year, excuse me, that led me to an agency called McLean Design, where I really cut my teeth and learned about the power of packaging and CPG, and I've been obsessed ever since.
Love it. And bear down for all the Wildcats out there.
Yeah, tough Final Four, but we won't talk about that.
Yeah, exactly. That's overall good. All right. So I want to go a little bit in your experience building the design agency. Building up to 30 people, pretty serious operation. So just could you talk us a little through that journey? Like how did that start, and what could you kind of learn about from that?
Yeah, I was 27 when I moved from San Francisco to Boulder, Colorado, where I live now, and moved in order to join a business partner and kickstart our agency called Interact. And we started with 3 people, mostly working with emerging brands. So like Vive Organic, which is now owned by Suja, or Kettle and Fire, a bone broth company doing, 70 plus million revenue in a year, or Koya, which is a plant-based protein drink that you can kind of find nationwide. Those were our very early stage clients, people that were looking to punch above their weight, and really kind of like crack into the sort of natural products movement that we're all seeing and feeling today. So, we started with really humble ambitions. We just wanted to do great design and, learned a lot of lessons along the way. But over time, we continued to get really good at working with founder-led brands, which I think is a particular skill set because you're working with visionaries and there's a lot of interpretation and kind of educating that comes with that. Had some early traction, as I said, and then we managed to scale that into like growth stage businesses, companies between 10 and 150 million that had product market fit and now needed to evolve for one reason or another. And as we continue to do more of that work, our team just slowly continued to scale. We brought on an account team, we brought on a full-time strategist, we brought on lots of designers, all sorts of different and wonderful people part of the process. And then the last maybe 5 years that I was part of the business, so we really started working with large strategics. So like Nestle and Conagra and Kraft Heinz and Mondelez and General Mills. And that was interesting because it's the complete opposite end of the founder-led spectrum. But we brought a lot of emerging instincts to the large strategics, and we tried to extrapolate and learn as much as we could from working with the large guys and bring those principles and philosophies to the people that needed to punch above their weight and kind of disrupt. So yeah, did that for 10 years and exited that business coming up on 2 years ago. I'll pause there.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think the before we get into kind of what you're doing now and your current setup, I'm curious. You were working with brands at all different stages. Like, are there commonalities and or key differences that you saw in how you approach that and kind of what works?
For us, I think we saw no matter where you were in a brand's life cycle or stage, that design had the power to fuel and push a business to its next stage. And so again, that was kind of a universal truth. If you're an entrepreneur just trying to sell into your first retailers or get into your first region of Whole Foods, like design was a big part of the presentation that either gave a buyer confidence or not. When you are then, maybe a growth stage business, you found traction. Oftentimes, like branding and design is probably a little underdeveloped. So the reinvestment in that is pretty good, but there are problems that you experience as you grow that you couldn't have foreseen. For instance, like portfolio management. You start with maybe with one product, you get so successful at it, and now you have money to do R&D. You want to innovate and do some product sublines, but all of a sudden you have to ask yourself, oh, well, how do these brand equities apply over here? Or how do we create segmentation so that consumers understand the difference between this product and this product? Or we're crossing aisles for the first time. We're not going to be near ourselves. How do we think about brand recognition and consistency when also we need to be flexible to different categories or competitors that we might have? So lots of kind of interesting nuances along the way. And then when you're a large strategic, like you've reached scale, you've got massive distribution. It's really about how do you use design to regain relevance,
Mm,
as well as like create things like ease of shoppability and either deposition, some sort of growing force or just be more of your own unique self. I think a lot of big brands eventually get so disconnected from their consumer base that they need folks from the outside to bring them back perspective and kind of tap them back into what's happening and how to reach their audiences or lapsed audiences or bring new people into the fold.
I'm sure many things that we could double click on and go deeper there, but
Yeah,
having
yeah.
that, those high level differences, I think is super, interesting to think about. Uh, so pivoting from Interact to, where you are today. So now more, you moved more into this fractional model, as I understand it. And so I'm curious, what made you kind of think about that transition or what changed or yeah, what made you move to what you're doing now?
Yeah, what we built at Interact was really special, and the folks there continue to do some great work. Ultimately, my business partner and I kind of wanted different things, and so we sort of agreed that it'd be best to part ways. So I did that, and I still have the hunger to kind of build an agency. But I think that what clients are looking for in an agency has shifted as well as the underlying business model. We can talk about AI, we can talk about all these great, freelancers and contractors, we can talk about flexibility and speed. So I wanted to really spend my time thinking through what is the future of the agency model, particularly within branding and design, the world that I know. Advertising is different, shopper marketing is different, et cetera. Um, and the model that I'm sort of working on right now is a creative consultancy that does a lot of project-based work with clients. So they come to us and they entrust us with sharing what their problems are. And I have a small team of three now that I sit at the center of, and we basically build teams bespokely to a client's needs. So we, from being in the industry for so long, have a pretty deep Rolodex and great relationships with folks, but every client needs something different. Rather than just relying on the talent that we've already paid for that sits on our bench full time, and we're just focused on how to utilize them to maximize their capacity and investment, we bring in freelancers and we're very transparent with that with clients. And we tell each client, we're bringing this freelancer for X, Y, and Z reasons. And that's been great. And we've had a lot of success working in that fashion. So it's agency-like engagement. But then on the other side, there's just a lot of, to your point, either fractional work that myself and my team are doing, or just outright kind of consultative work where we come in for a particular phase. Maybe an example is like we recently worked with a large juice brand. They wanted to go through an RFP process and do a redesign. They needed to know though why, like how should we change and why, and what should the parameters for this brief be. So we came in, did a bunch of brand work, category work, uh, stakeholder interviews, all this stuff, put it together in tight briefs. And then because I have no sort of ego or agenda about me having to do the work, I helped facilitate a lot of agency partnership meetings. So talk to these five groups. You're looking for evolutionary style. I think these are the people that do it best. They picked and then kept us on to sit on the client side of the table for the process, in
Hmm.
part because CMOs, EVPs, or directors of marketing, a lot of them don't have a specific experience in design and packaging. And they also want to ensure that like they have someone that can help them think through their feedback, think strategically with them as they receive work, help amplify that of the partner that they have, and just in general make a smoother project out of things. So that was a really fascinating one. But other times, there's a lot of large CPG clients that have in-house internal creative teams, but they need some outside perspective. So we'll kind of bolt on for a form of engagement, push them, push the thinking, bring some fresh ideas, kind of make an accomplishment, and then kind of extract ourselves and let them kind of continue on. So for me, it's all about flexibility and just providing value where possible.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think it's, it echoes things that we see on, on our side of the agency as well. It's like we're evolving the service offering, being more flexible, coming
Yep.
up with, project-based things and, or tailored executions. And especially, things are just changing very quickly. So being able to adapt and meet clients where they're at is, I think, really
Amen.
valuable. Yeah,
Amen.
that's cool. Uh, so talk a little bit about, typical engagement. Can you talk a little bit about the types of brands that you're working with today? Talk about kind of the evolution with Interact. So are you and you touched on it a little bit there, but are you still, working with both like the emerging, the growth stage, the strategics, or is it more, what does that look like today?
Yeah, it does look like the full gamut. There's a founder out of Los Angeles who was formerly Liquid Death. He wanted to start a hydration brand called HiQ. Built it from scratch with him. It was pre-revenue, so got involved very early, in part because I believed in both the founder's person as well as the space that they were going after and the product. And so, it's not our biggest pain clients or budgets, but it's work that we want to be a part of because we believe in what it's doing and it will pay other types of dividends down the road. Most of our time, though, is not spent working with kind of like early stage entrepreneurs. I'd say it's mostly in that growth stage. Businesses 10 to 150 million. That being said, though, we do have a couple of clients that are, Fortune 1000 companies that we're working with. And I think honestly, working at all ends of the spectrum keeps myself and my team fresh. You have so many agencies out there, and we've seen them like they fall into a particular playbook or what we experience to Interact. The more overhead you have, the more you're forced to kind of go upstream and work with a particular size of client that can afford you. And I think what we want to be able to do is pick and choose based on the right opportunities, holding to the value that we bring, but not being dead set on always having to have X margins or things of that nature, or a floor limit on a client if we really want to get invested with them. So it is pre-revenue to billion-dollar status right now with clients, which makes things pretty unique. But again, I think keeps us sharp to like what is everyone's pain points and how do we take learnings from this project over this guy and vice versa.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I think that those cross learnings at different stages seem like really valuable and being able to bring that for both, right? There's you kind of see where they could be potentially going and being able to solve
Yep.
those problems early for an emerging brand. And then the opposite, right? Being able to bring the kind of, more forward thinking, riskier stuff to large brands seems really
Exactly.
unique. Yeah.
Yeah, you summed
Yeah.
that up very well.
Awesome. So I want to get into some specifics about branding, design, and like takeaways for brands that might be listening. So I think getting into thinking about where the product actually lives, like where are people seeing on the shelf and how design kind of connects to the category. And so how do you think about, where the product lives on the shelf and how that connects to like design strategy, or your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago, D2C was so hot and everyone was like, it's the future and retail's dead. And the truth is, though, the best brands in the world are all omni-channel brands. But what works online does not work in retail. And retail at the end of the day is where the rubber meets the road, where the distribution is, and where the business gains really lie. For instance, we used to do a lot of work with Dr. Squatch, which acquired by Unilever. I can't remember what the price tag, over $1 billion, something very impressive for, soap for men, basically. We worked with them when they were pre-retail. They only existed online. I think they were doing 150 million revenue, just e-com, which was so incredibly impressive. But they knew that the way that they operated online was not how they could show up in a competitive environment. And part of what I love about our industry is, particularly packaging design, it's the only form of competitive design. When you go to retail, you're on the shelf with all of these other choices. And it's not just like, oh, the same kind of product, but product occasion, share of stomach, share of moment. Like there's
Hmm.
all of these things, and you really get into the psychology of how consumers think and shop and use their hard-earned money to buy things. So um, packaging design has the power to move the needle, to create trial, to shift consumer behavior. One of our principles is what isn't seen isn't sold. And so if you're an entrepreneurial brand, you have to find a way to be visible because consumers aren't expecting to look for you, or they're not always in environments where they're looking to just um, trial different things. You go into the store, you kind of pick, you have your favorites, you go in. And so design can be a powerful disruptor there. That means taking into account how many SKUs or facings do you have on a shelf? What are the different design codes and semiotics? One thing I love to talk about is like color strategy and philosophy. Right now, if you talk about beverages, like everyone loves to change the color of their packaging per flavor. It's the poppy effect, right? That you use the whole rainbow, and that works really great as the pendulum swings away from these monolithic large brands and companies that feel really constrained. Or talk about Goodles mac and cheese versus a Kraft Blue Box. Like Kraft Blue
Hmm.
Box feels really kind of just old and stodgy and inflexible. And suddenly Goodles is fun and playful and flavor forward and all of these other things. But at the same time, you'll find categories where, again, they hit a tipping point. They're all filled with color, and you actually need to own a singular brand color strategy. So those are just like some crude examples of how those things work. I think also just understanding how to challenge a category without challenging the consumer is another principle of ours that we preach. Essentially, like, what is it that all brands are sort of taking for granted and no one's doing differently? And it's easy to use the example of like Liquid Death. We probably couldn't record an episode without mentioning it. Otherwise, it's not a podcast. But in the water bottle category, it's all about, are you from a mountain? Are you from a spring? Are you from an island? Like it's just all terroir based, and there was nothing really interesting about any of that playbook. Liquid Death comes in, obviously, they don't even talk about, you don't even know where the water's coming from for the most part. It was attitudinal, it was lifestyle oriented, and it's just an example of trying to find something that's long been ignored and using design to tell a new narrative that doesn't disrupt. Now, Liquid Death is highly disruptive, and it took them forever to crack into retail. They were an on-premise brand for a long time. But you can talk about Bonza pasta as another example, or Graza, right? You look at Graza in the olive oil category. Everyone's in glass bottles. All of the labels feel like these imported products, overly precious. No one even knows what extra virgin means. Um, and they put it into a plastic bottle that's squeezable, that feels approachable, that makes you more comfortable with the idea of buying olive oil to cook with. And it's got a whole different kind of personality. And to me, it was a perfect example of challenge the category and all the stuffiness that's going on without challenging the consumer. Consumers were looking for something easier. They just didn't know how to ask for it till it showed up.
Yeah, I like that. The challenge the category without challenge the consumer is an interesting frame to come up with. Yeah, see a lot of ideas come out of that. That's really,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. I want to shift a little bit to talk about different stakeholders in the design process. And so as you're building it, and I guess I'll put three out there. You can adjust this however you see, but you've
Yeah.
got you're working with the the brand lead or the founder, and then thinking about the buyer in terms of, let's focus on retail for a minute, right? So the retail
Yep.
buyer and then the end consumer. And so when you're going through that process, yeah, how do you think through those different stakeholders and maybe some tension that comes up in those decisions?
That's a great question. I mean, ultimately, what we tell all of our clients is we're designing for your consumers. We're not designing for you. In the early days, a lot of founders start their brands because they experienced some sort of problem that there was no solution to. And they figured there were other people like them with that same problem, right? So they sort of designed to find that white space. But as a brand scales, you need to consider how audiences start to shift or what becomes your primary audience versus your secondary audience. So anytime you're working with brand founders, I think it's getting ahead, getting to know them, building relationships. I always argue that the best work comes from the best relationships. So, building trust and understanding like how participatory they want to be. For some founders, it's very, very personal. And so they have either creative instinct or taste that they need to see embodied in whatever we're designing in order to feel comfortable holding it. There are other founders, though, that are much more like operational or business oriented, and they're like, whatever works best for the consumer. So I think you need to understand first and foremost who's in charge of the business and what's their philosophy, because you have to ladder those things up a little bit and meet them where they're at. You mentioned retail buyer. I think that's such a smart one that really gets overlooked by most design firms, in part because it feels like it's just a middleman that doesn't really matter. I'd say for most retail environments, if you go to a buyer and you tell them you're going through a redesign and here's why we're doing it and here's why consumers like it more if we've done some of either qual or quant, they're usually satisfied. But Costco is notorious for having buyers that have a perspective on what works in their store and how you need to conform to their needs. Always interesting, and you do need to understand the environments. In club, it's like big product, quantity call out because consumers are doing quick math and like brand is secondary or tertiary, even in some instances. And so a designer or a design agency needs to understand when that context shift, how design needs to adapt to that and not just have sort of like one, absolute way of doing any of it work. But ultimately, I really do believe in the consumer. I know a lot of agencies hate doing research because they feel like it muddies the work or dilutes it or takes the edge off. I'm just a believer that you test to learn in order to win, and testing should happen in the very early stages on a more qualitative level than quantitative. I think agencies hate validation because it happens at the very end after you've put all this time and work, and if you don't get the green light or it's like a mixed thing, then all of a sudden you're going to go back to the drawing board and like do some other things. And this happens more with large strategics that are trying to mitigate risk. But if you test early on, and I like to have my clients test three concepts after we do our concept presentation. We'll learn something about each. There will be learnings that we can cross pollinate. And if they're qualitative in nature, we'll be able to read between the lines and pick up on patterns and build something that I think is meaningful. And at the end of the day, all designers and all creative agencies are trying to design for people and understand, how to connect dots. So research gives you more dots to play with. And I think we're all creative problem solvers. So we want a good challenge. It just needs to come in the right form and fashion.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think the stakeholder piece is super interesting in thinking about those. And then, I mean, you just brought up the research piece, which I think is also super interesting, and that comes up with us a lot. And obviously, we're kind of the far other end of the spectrum. We're out there, we're testing things that it's already established. But I'm curious, it's just as much of personal curiosity as anything else. But within that, like the research testing piece, you mentioned the large strategics come in it. I'm curious, and like the resistance from the design agency. Like we've seen some resistance on, maybe in the growth stage or definitely on the
Mm,
emerging stages budgets in doing research at all.
yes.
And how could you talk a little bit about that and how you think about that?
Yeah. I mean, testing is expensive. That's very much a reality. Sometimes you have founders with such conviction that they don't care. And if the business is of a certain size, I think that's totally legitimate. But, once you start to get 20, 50, 100 million, you kind of want to know if what you're going to do is going to be a positive thing on the business or if you're going to give yourself a Tropicana and tank things. Alternatives, I think we're having more brands building community early, particularly if they have some sort of e-commerce footprint where they have access to at least brand loyalists. So being able to like pull some of them or find your super fans, do surveys that way is typically inefficient. You just have to make sure that you're cognizant of the inherent bias that comes with talking with your loyalists, right? Like not a lot of people love change. I think it's usually always great to just talk to category buyers in general rather than loyalists because you want to most oftentimes you want to think about how you continue to grow the brand rather than protect the base that you've built. Again, size dependent. Store intercepts. I mean, sometimes I'm sure like you, CJ, you and I, we both go to the grocery store and we're there for hours and our wives are not so happy about that. But I've stopped people in aisle when I'm either doing research on a category and I'm kind of just doing my audits or I'm trying to get a sense of the retail shelf and someone comes up and naturally picks something. I will be like, excuse me, do you mind if I talk to you for a second? And usually like, as long as you're not bringing creepy vibes, they'll talk to you. Those are more informal ways, but there are lots of ways to get smart. It all doesn't have to be quantitative, right? It ultimately doesn't come down to the numbers. It's a lot of it like a feeling thing. It's art and science. And so typically with early stage brands, I'll try to help guide them with finding scrappy ways to just stay connected to what we're doing.
That's great. I think those are the literally go to the store and see what people are buying and ask them is a great scrappy way at the
Yeah.
beginning. And we've done similar things with like an email list survey and just to try to get something in there. Those are
Yeah.
great takeaways.
Demos are also great, right? Like if you're a young founder and you're out there hawking your products, what do people say? What are the reactions? And also reading between the lines, what are their facial expressions? They're going to tell you nice things in person, but like,
Mm.
what are the other subtleties or codes or what's your retailer telling you at the demo? You'll also get feedback and what are your turns? What are the category norms? What's your velocity like compared to everybody else? There's going to be all sorts of signals. You just have to be smart about interpreting them.
No, that's great. Let's move into talk about brand hierarchy. So you
Mm.
touched on this earlier, right? As brands grow and they start with the hero product and then they start to innovate and they bring out other things. So how do you think about, working on that, or maybe more specifically, kind of bridging from, your hero product to, okay, now we're going to have multiple SKUs, and what is that? How do you think about that?
Sometimes in the early days, all you can do is think about that hero SKU because if you don't find success there, you never live to see another day to innovate or these other things, right? So I think there's some recognition of that, and you can't build the perfect playbook from day one. But what you can do is be considerate of what might future innovation look like as a brand. What do you stand for, and what does that mean in terms of where you go? A lot of founders will start, I think, with a kind of narrow idea of what they're building, like particularly when you get into the ingredient space, like, oh yeah, we sell matcha beverages, so we're a matcha company, or like, yeah, our first product is coconut water, so we're just a coconut water company. Um, that's always, I think, dangerous if, for many reasons, you box yourself in. There's no flexibility in R&D long term. Like we found this with one of our old clients, Bobo's Oat Bars. They were all about oats, and like that was great. It was even embedded in the brand name, but we said you should one, shorten your name to Bobo's. Two, oat bars is a product attribute, not a brand attribute. Because what if someday you want to go play with sorghum or bran or whatever else you can dream up that your audience may be open to. So I think focusing on brand strategy in the early days just gives the client a little bit more flexibility in their mind and less rigidity. And then, yeah, once they, usually what happens is you get one product, several flavors. Oh, maybe I should come out with a protein line, right? Which is happening a lot right now. It's like, okay, why are you putting protein in? Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And there's a lot of that going on in the industry. And then if there's a real relevance there, okay, how do we create segmentation? How do we make this one feel unique as opposed to this core line that you started with? And um, it's tough because every example requires different parameters around it. So I don't want to talk too much in the abstract. But ultimately, you're trying to build out a brand universe. And what I always love to do is I love to look at other examples, both in category and outside of category. Okay, how are other people managing their portfolios? Because there's a lot to learn from looking at others. And then you can decide, oh, I think this would lay over on top of our brand nicely. And we just did this with a client where we showed them like several different brands and their different segmentation strategies and like which one feels like you. And they're like, oh, this one does. It's like, great. You may not know how to think about it, but when you look at someone else, suddenly you get more objective and less subjective about what you're building. And I think that's helpful.
No, that's good. It's a good takeaway for that framing of it. I think I know you talked about these concepts of brand in hand versus brand in world. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means and how you think about that?
Yeah. So brand in hand for Coca-Cola, it's like it's always red. It's got a white stripe that runs through it. There's certain things that you just feel when you're interacting with the product physically. But when you think about Coca-Cola, that's brand in mind, you think of happiness. And then when you think about brand in world, well, how do they activate it? I think of polar bears, I think of Santa Claus, I think of summertime. So there's all of these things that a brand like Coca-Cola has built over what 150 years. Like it's a little unfair to use, but it's an example we can all relate to. So oftentimes entrepreneurial brands only have the brand in hand moment. That's all they get. Consumer sees them on shelf, they maybe purchase it, and they're looking at what's happening on the front, turn around to the side, maybe, and like that is the brand experience. Maybe I love what I bought. I want to go find it on socials. Now I'm getting content from them. I'm starting to get a peek into the world, but the world only happens if you kind of double click in. And most consumers don't see the world. I mean, there are so many points of media and things that are fighting for attention, right? So Brandon Hand is critical to win at shelf and drive the business forward. Brandon World is critical to kind of cast a wider net and bring people into your universe. And then eventually, which all of what you're trying to do is establish the brand in mind. When I say, brand name, what are the associations that you have? What do you think of? And the best brands in the world all understand the power of that. Apple, Starbucks, Nike, list goes on, McDonald's, etc. And they're very controlled about those things. So there's kind of a natural progression of how we think about those things and making sure that entrepreneurs that we work with have the right prioritization of those things. Some founders are very visionary and they want to start with the world. And Liquid Death is a prime example of that. It was never just a can, and they were always doing all these things. But if that's not what a particular founder or group's skill sets are, then you kind of need to start with the brand in hand and going back to like your points about how important retail is.
Yeah, and then build it from there.
Yeah.
That's cool. Appreciate you digging into that. Another one that I pulled up, you talked about the six tennis balls idea. And that's again, this is research I did online. So if there's any other
Yeah,
way
no,
you want to take this, please do. But you talk a little bit about what this idea is, and maybe if there's any example you could pull in of where you actually use this.
yeah. So what you're alluding to is this principle of simplify in order to amplify, and brands typically have an embarrassment of riches. There's all these things that they want to talk about and get credit for. So let's use the example of Bonza. Bonza, chickpea pasta, protein pasta. Um, but did you know that they're also like vegan, non-GMO, gluten-free, plant-based, like list goes on and on and on, right? But on the front of their box, the only thing they talk about is protein content, fiber content, and then a whisper of chickpea. They've purposely
Mhm.
consolidated the number of things that they tell you up front, and then there's all these things you'll find out after the fact. That is what strategy is. And so, if I were to toss you a ball up, a tennis ball right now, CJ, you'd catch it. If I tossed you two, you could probably catch it. But the more balls I start to throw at you, the more you're going to miss all of them. So if I throw you six, like you probably won't catch a single one. And that's what we try to teach our early stage clients is like just because you have all of these things you can talk about doesn't mean you should. You need to find the ones that are the most resonant with the largest audience that matters to you and own that. Because otherwise you're just creating a distraction and the NASCAR effect where there's 50 different sponsorship logos on the front of pack. And now you no longer look premium. You no longer look confident as a brand. You look like you're begging for things. I mean, I hate it when I see a brand like have seven different certifications on the front. It's like, my goodness. To me, it's a signal that the company doesn't know who they're actually marketing to. They're just throwing everything against the wall and hoping something sticks. And that's not a recipe for success when it comes to communication.
Hmm. Do you see it as something that could be like established up front early on, or something that kind of comes as an evolution of the brand, or a combination?
I think it's both. Brands should always be mindful of how trends and categories shift. Bonza, I think, has actually historically done a really good job of like modifying things. At one point, they were talking about number of vegetable servings in their pasta.
Mhm.
Then they switched it to fiber because fiber is more prominent now. Protein has always been the thing because they understood most of us want to eat pasta several nights a week, but we feel guilty. And knowing that there's high protein in it creates the sense of permissibility. So it depends on what you're trying to establish and what's the motivation or the driver for the consumer. But yeah, start with something and then you'll learn from it. The market will give you feedback, or you'll see the competitive field around you starting to either shift or follow your strategy. And those are signals too. But over time, it should adjust because to your point earlier about like innovation and things, well, your brand might begin to stand for more things than just any one singular macro or product benefit. And it's important that you don't pigeonhole yourself into that because what if all of your products are protein, then you do a non-protein, and people are like, what is this? Like, I don't want that. You're a protein company. It's like, oh, actually, we weren't. We just didn't set the table right for people to see the bigger picture.
Yeah, interesting. I want to shift gears to talk a little bit about AI. So AI, impact on obviously, yeah, everything. But specifically for you, what I'm curious on, like drill in and one, like how do you think about it? How are you seeing brands think about it? And then, impact both on the strategy side as well as the design side.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating because depending on the type of client you're working with, you'll find different camps. The large strategics, Fortune 1000s, they're very conservative from a governance perspective, making sure that they're not going to get sued, et cetera. So there's an intense curiosity internally, but externally, there's very little that they want to sort of use with AI. And you see a lot of big companies get flack for AI. I mean, Coca-Cola, what was it, their second Christmas now with their AI Christmas
Mhm.
commercials, and like people are shitting on it. And then you have Apple, do some sort of crazy color motion graphic with their logo, and it's like all done like manually with glass, and people are like celebrating it culturally. So it's a touchy subject, but for entrepreneurial clients, a lot of them are like, Fred, I don't want to do a photo shoot. I want to do an AI like generated thing. And I'm like, all right, well, let's start with the question of like, is that right for you? If you're a natural product talking about simple ingredients in nature and you want AI imagery, like, is that aligned? Like, should we be doing that? Should we not? Should we at least shoot source imagery and work off of that? Like, there's all sorts of different things. I use AI a lot with our company, call notes, synthesizing strategy, helping generate ideas, etc. But I think at the end of the day, true creativity, if done well, is really coming from unexpected places and things that are not repetitive of patterns that already exist. And so we want to be fresh and look at interesting things and get outside of the hamster wheel that sometimes AI can just put us all on. I'd be lying if I said I had it figured out. I don't. And I'm working through it with a lot of different clients that, again, see different uses and want different things for it. But it's here and it's coming, and it's only a matter of time before those tools are put into founders' hands and they can start generating more novel expressions of their ideas. I actually have a pet peeve, and it's something I want to write about on LinkedIn of like founders that send me AI generated packaging. To me, I actually think that's like the worst use of their time because it creates these sort of blinders and they get wed to the thing that was given to them. Those outputs should be seen as tools, not deliverables. And I would actually rather have the time that a client spent trying to talk to AI and find the perfect thing and actually just build like a custom mood board or something, or give me a bunch of swipe imagery. You're hiring me to sort of like read between lines and like solve a creative problem. But AI generated packaging to me just like tightens the guardrails and limits long-term vision. And now we have to fight to get you to unsee the thing that you made and have you see other potential. And I think it doesn't benefit either party long term.
That's super interesting. Yeah, and I think it speaks to this and something that we've seen too. And we use AI heavily, and we have a lot of workflows that we've been doing and figuring out what that offering looks like for clients. But one of the things that always comes out is, if you're a subject matter expert and you're working with AI in that subject matter, you have a better sense of where are the edges, how to steer it, what to take in as, a good idea or a good framing and not. And I think
Yep.
that's something that, we often see in working with clients where it's like, yeah, like if you're going and you're just asking a generic question and it comes back with something and you think like, wow, this is amazing. Look at what it gave me. And then I look at that and I'm like, yeah, this isn't exactly what to think about for your
100%.
go-to-market
100%.
strategy. So
You
there's
get in
some,
what you, yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. Good in,
yeah,
good out, bad in, bad out.
yeah, yep. Yeah, and I think part of the way we've been thinking about is educating clients also on like if you are going to go to do that, here's some guidance on how to do it in a productive way, right? Or like what would be valuable to kind of come back to us from an AI output, or conversation that I think
Yep.
could be useful.
Yeah.
All right. I wanted to 'cause we're kind of getting on time here. The Ask you about some brands. So like we've mentioned a bunch of brands in the conversation, but I'm curious. Do you have any brands that could be quickly working with or not, but you think in food and beverage that are doing some great work now that deserve more attention?
Yeah. I mean, I'm fortunate to go to, gosh, 12 food and beverage trade shows a year and then pet industry. So I see so much stuff and meet so many incredible people. I'll give a couple names. One I met at Expo West, a brand called Moozy, Moozy,
Hmm.
fifth generation dairy farmer who's trying to make milk cool. He's putting milk into sleek 12-ounce cans. The branding is awesome. And he has like whole milk, 2% milk in a 12-ounce can, and then also coffee milk, horchata milk, like different flavors of milk, just presented in totally new and unique and novel formats. And there's so little innovation within fluid dairy. This is really, really cool and presents so well. So that's one you'll definitely have to kind of look at. There's an amazing founder out of Canada that I met at the Canadian Health Food Association trade show last September. And she actually just sent me products. The brand's called Tofu Go. It's trying to make tofu more like a convenient like protein bar. So really unique, on the go. We think of tofu, all this prep, all this flavor stuff that we got to do and mix it with other things. And like here she is trying to reframe people's perceptions of tofu and what tofu can be and the role that it can play and almost like give the snackification of tofu. So I think that's really cool and novel. There's another founder I met, Noon, Noon. They're all like adaptogenic, sort of mushroom powered supplements. So there's three gummies. They have a chill line, a sleep line, and a focus line. The gummies themselves are really beautiful if you check them out on the website. The packaging is really interesting. It's kind of all like opaque packs with silver type and gradients. And just again, there's so much going on in the gummy space. Grunes just got acquired last week.
Yeah.
LinkedIn can't seem to talk about anything else right now. And that format before them, it was Goalie with the apple cider vinegar gummies, and like, that whole world is really, really fascinating and interesting, and it's only going to continue to accelerate. And so you see some really interesting things from founders, and then yeah, I'll just give another shout out to this brand out of LA, HiQ, that's building like a better sports hydration beverage in a can, focused on kind of run club culture. And it's really about audience because in a category like that, there's so much hydration. It ultimately comes down to like, who are you going after and how is it that you are expressing your unique point of difference? Because they're a dime a dozen. And this great Miles Davis quote that I love to use, which is 20% is the note, 80% is how the motherfucker plays it. You may need to go back and beat me on that edit. But all that to say, like, CJ, you and I can both pick up a saxophone. We can try to play a couple chords, but like the swagger and the style that you bring are going to make those chords your own. It's like the national anthem, right? And so sometimes differentiation does not come down to a product level, it comes out in an expression level. Liquid Death, it's still water in a can. It's the most
Mhm.
ubiquitous commodity in the world. And so, anyways, I just think IQ is doing something cool.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. All right, Fred. And one last question before I get there. I wanted to point people to connect with you. So I know point people to your website, Fred Hart, and that's HART.com. And are there other places you'd recommend people connect? I know you're active on LinkedIn, but yeah, anywhere else you'd point people?
LinkedIn or any upcoming trade show. If there's a show and samples, I'm there usually. I'm a glutton for trade show stomach punishment. And yeah, and I'd say in the next 3 to 6 months, I'll be launching like a formal site for the creative consultancy that we're building. But right now, LinkedIn's probably the best place.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we can follow up with the site when it's ready to go. All right, before we hop off, I wanted to just ask one more question about common mistakes. So like mistakes that you see, brands get wrong. If there's, one or two things you can think of that you see over and over again, what is it, and what would you recommend brands do instead?
Brand naming. It's the thing I love to like talk a lot about, and I think a lot of founders are way too literal or descriptive with their brand names, and eventually it creates some real tension as the business tries to grow and stretch out of boundaries. We talked a little bit about it on this call with Bubba's Oat Bars. Sometimes you come up with a name that people don't know, like Guayaquil, too hard to pronounce, and big giant business known for the yellow cans. Thank God they created visual recognition, not verbal, and they just rebranded to Yerba Madre, which I think was a masterclass and stroke of genius to name something so close to yerba mate. But yeah, I work with a lot of founders. I mean, anytime there's a big trend, when we look back at the keto movement 5 years ago, there were so many brands like called like Keto Pint or Perfect Keto or like all of these derivatives. When that trend like becomes a fad or moves on, you're stuck with this name that doesn't tell a bigger story. One of my favorite examples is Siete, the kind of grain-free tortilla and chip company which Pepsi bought, started out as must be nutty tortillas.
I
And
didn't
to
know
me, it
that.
just, yeah, it's so funny. It was a punny name. They were made with almonds, right? Almond flour tortillas, so must be nutty. But like, what if they make a product that isn't nut focused? Or what does that tell you about anything else? Siete, the number of people in the family, like a much bigger story, so much more interesting, so much room for innovation and meaning over time. So I've done a lot of renaming for clients. It's a fun art and a practice. It can be a painful one too. But I think that's the number one thing that I would tell early stage founders is like changing your name is not an admission of failure, but recognition that there's untapped potential for you to move into. And so people always think it's so painful. I can point out any example of like a company bigger than yours that's probably done a rename and gone on to have more success as a result. So that's the one I'll stick with.
I love that. I love that. It's a great way to end. So we've been talking to Fred Hart, creative consultant, design strategist at Hart Brands. Sure to check him out at fredhart.com and soon to come his consultancy, which we will link as well when it's ready. And you can connect with Fred Hart on LinkedIn. Fred, thanks so much for being on the show.
CJ, my pleasure. Talk to you soon, bud.
Thanks for listening to the Missing Ingredient podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.